During the Second World War, we saw many short-lived Axis puppet states. In this video, we're gonna look at the independent state of Croatia. How independent was this state exactly? That is what you're gonna find out today. Good to have you back on the channel. My name is Stevan, I'm a history teacher and I like to cover history on location for you. And if you find it interesting, consider subscribing and also hit that notification bell. During the Second World War, there were many Axis puppet states that's different from one another. The Protectorate of Bohemia Moravia in the Czech lands, the Slovak Republic, the Hellenic state in Greece. There was obviously the government of national unity in Hungary. And in this video, we're going to discuss the independent state of Croatia. Now, a wise man once told me that every time there is a word in the name of a state that has to emphasize a certain character, in this case, independent, it's most likely quite the opposite. Let's discuss how independent was the independent state of Croatia, in short, the NDH. Well, we first need to discuss how this state was actually proclaimed. And that happened when the Germans entered Zagreb on the 10th of April 1941. This was during the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia, where also Italy and Hungary participated in. Now, the whole run-up and the combat operations during this Axis invasion I covered in a different video. The Axis invasion of Yugoslavia lasted just 12 days. A German officer named it a parade rather than a military campaign. After the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was defeated, it was partitioned by the Axis powers. And what you need to know is that 40% of the now bygone South Slav kingdom went to the so-called independent state of Croatia. This state was a de facto kingdom with the Italian monarch, which was named Tomislav II, on the throne, but he never resided here in Croatia. Now, who did reside in Croatia was Ante Pavelić, the Poglavnik, the leader of the NDH. And he was the leader of the Ustasha. Now, the Ustasha was a movement that drew its inspiration from Italian fascism, German Nazism, authoritarianism, peasantism, and they for sure were anti-Yugoslav. And they advocated a large Croatian state. And this state they got, with the help of the Germans obviously, who managed the Independence Proclamation. Now, one thing I want to emphasize right now is that only a fraction of the Croatians actively supported the Ustasha. They definitely were not all fanatics like the Ustasha were. Most Croats did support the, resurrection of the Croatian state, but they soon got disappointed. Now, actually, initially, the Germans wanted to support the HSS, the Croatian Peasant Party, led by Vlatko Maček, but Maček, he refused to cooperate with the Germans, so therefore the Germans opted for the Ustasha. Many Croats initially welcomed the founding of the NDH. It is important to note that many Croats believed that the establishment of the NDH would spare Croatia from the ravages of war and foreign military occupation. Very soon, however, it became obvious that these hopes were nothing but illusions. The Ustashi, they unleashed a wave of murderous violence against those they deemed unfit for the new Croatian state. And these were mainly three groups of people. I'm talking about the Serbs, the Jews, and the Roma. Many died at the hands of the Ustasha death squads that roamed the countryside. Others were deported to Croatian concentration camps. Most infamous was the Jasenovac complex, where many would die in horrifying ways. The Germans and Italians stationed in Croatia were actually quite appalled by the violence. Those who owned a camera took photographs. The Germans carried out investigations and reported back to Berlin. German General Paul Bader proposed in the spring of 1942 to shoot at the Ustasha troops who committed atrocity, not out of consideration for the Serbs, but to restore order. The Germans, they were keen on order, but the violence of the Croatian ultranationalists disrupted that. And that's the main reason why the Germans were outraged. Ustasha brutality was blamed for fueling the armed rebellion that the German army sought to quash. Now, I read that in some cases the Italians intervened and saved people from the Ustasha, and in other cases they disarmed Ustasha squads and protests of Germans that were stationed here. They led Pavelić to outlaw these wild killings, but this was little more than cosmetic, as Hitler had encouraged Pavelić to pursue a nationally intolerant policy. To sum it up, the Ustashi, they could operate independently when it came down to the killings of its inhabitants without much interference of the Axis. Do notice that when the NDH was set up, the Germans and Italians divided the state into spheres of influence. Germans were stationed in this area and Italians here. Most Croats weren't bothered with the presence of German soldiers, but concerned about the relations with fascist Italy as the new Croatian-Italian border was negotiated. The Italians annexed territories around the port city of Split and the naval base of Kotor, now Montenegro, with additions to Zadar, which was already in Italian hands. These areas were bombarded with Italian propaganda. The hinterland Italian control was less visible, but local administration was under Italian control. There were different zones of occupation. Zone 1, the annexed areas I just mentioned. Zone 2, a demilitarized zone. And Zone 3, the remainder of the territory to the demarcation line bordering the German zone. In reality, Zone 2 was put under complete control of the Italian army and other Italian representatives. And in Zone 3, the Italians exerted strong influence on developments, especially the economy. The Italian presence in the NDH prevented Zagreb from establishing effective control over the majority of its territory belonging to Zones 2 and 3. On the other hand, however, while the Italian moves increased the level of disorder, they could not prevent the NDH authorities from committing numerous war crimes in these territories, especially during 1941. Now let's take a look at the German influence. Now, unlike Italy, the Germans had no territorial demands regarding Croatia. In order to gain German support, the Ustasha, they opted racial policies. A decree against Jews was issued in April 1941. German ambassador to Zagreb, Siegfried Kasche, played an important role in the relations between the Germans and the Croatians during World War II. Then there was also the German plenipotentiary general in Croatia from 1941 to 44. This was General Edmund Glaser von Horstenau. He protected German interests in the region. Other Nazi institutions, the NSDAP, the Gestapo and the SS, were also present in the NDH. And the ethnic Germans in the area were granted privileges. These Volksdeutsche would recognize the sovereignty of the independent state of Croatia. In reality, various parts of the Volksgruppe, the ethnic Germans, showed little respect for the NDH authorities. It maintained special relations with German institutions in Croatia and also established direct connections with institutions in the Third Reich. The building you see right here, which was constructed in the 1930s, was converted into a mosque. By doing this, Pavelić hoped to ensure the support of the Muslim population within the NDH. Now, in reality, the Muslims were very divided. Some did support the Axis. There were even SS formations, such as the SS Handschar and the SS Kama, which consisted of Bosnian Muslims. But other Muslims fought in the resistance. And many wanted to avoid conflict simply because they wanted to survive, like most people did. Now let's take a look at the Croatian economy. Well, it relied heavily on the economy of the Third Reich. The Germans were in need of raw materials, and this had a devastating effect on the Croatian economy that was plagued by shortages. And during 1942, the pressure on the Croatian economy and politics increased as the country became a battlefield. The Croatian Home Guard was not able to defeat Tito's partisans that grew in numbers steadily. The Croatians undertook several large-scale offensives together with the Germans and also with the Chetniks, until 1943 the Italians. But the Croatian Home Army was so weak that the Germans had to commit more and more troops to the region in order to defeat the rebellion. German military and political domination was more than evident, and in reality the NDH was just one among many European states under German military occupation, despite the fact that it was a nominally independent state with its own government and armed forces. Italy surrendered in September 1943. I did make an episode about what happened to the Italian soldiers after that. Thereby the Italian zones were given to Croatia, and therefore the NDH extended. In August 1944, high-ranking Croatian officials staged an abortive coup d'etat which failed, and Ante Pavelić remained in power, but not for long, because eventually the Yugoslav partisans gained the upper hand and they, well, liberated large parts of the country. And why do I say liberated? Well, for many people it was not a liberation, as the communist forces executed purges in which many would die. In May 1945, many Croatian Home Guard troops, as well as Slovenes and Cossack collaborators, they retreated into Austria. However, the British, they handed many of them over to Tito's partisans. And as a result of this, many of them were executed by the partisans. Some Croatians kept fighting. The last battle that took place was on the 25th of May, which was the Battle of Odzak, in which, well, leftover Croatian troops fought against the partisans. Croatia became part of post-war Yugoslavia, led by Josip Broz Tito. The country would gain its independence in the 1990s. Now, if you want to know why Croatia joined the Axis in the first place, click here, and click here for my video about the Axis invasion of Yugoslavia. Thank you so much for watching. Best wishes from Zagreb.